The bitter taste of whiskey burned Abigail Northcott's throat as she knocked back the last drops from her glass, the single lamp in her bedroom casting long shadows over her half-packed trunk. Deadwood, Dakota Territory, 1876. A place that had promised her a fresh start 2 years ago now seemed like a prison she couldn't escape fast enough. The morning stage would take her away from the whispers that followed her through town like persistent ghosts, away from the shame that clung to her name after Frederick Marshall's very public rejection at last week's Founders' Day dance. "I won't marry damaged goods," he had announced loudly enough for half the town to hear, leaving her standing alone as curious eyes turned to stare. Abigail folded her best Sunday dress and placed it carefully in the trunk. Her fingers lingered on the blue fabric, remembering how she'd worn it the day she first saw Heath Norton riding into town. Heath with his quiet ways and storm-gray eyes that seemed to see right through a person. Not that it mattered now. By tomorrow, she'd be nothing but a memory in Deadwood, and Heath would go on being the most sought-after bachelor in the territory with his sprawling ranch and reputation for fair dealing. A sharp knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Abigail." Mrs. Willoughby's concerned voice came through the wood. "There's someone here to see you. I told him it's far too late for callers, but he's insisting." "Tell whoever it is that I'm indisposed," Abigail called back, wiping away an errant tear. The last thing she needed was another townsperson pretending concern while fishing for gossip. "It's Mr. Norton, miss. Says it's urgent." Abigail's heart lurched painfully in her chest. "Heath Norton? Here." She smoothed her skirts and hastily pinched color into her pale cheeks before opening the door. Mrs. Willoughby, her landlady, stood there wringing her hands. "He's waiting in the parlor. I told him ladies don't receive gentlemen at this hour, but he was most insistent." "Thank you, Mrs. Willoughby. I'll see him." The parlor was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, and Heath Norton's tall figure stood silhouetted against the window. He turned when she entered, and Abigail was struck by how different he looked from his usual composed self. His dark hair was windblown, hat clutched in his hands, and there was an intensity in his eyes she'd never seen before. "Miss Northcott," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I apologize for the late hour. Mr. Norton, this is unexpected." She kept her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "What brings you here at such an hour? You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Abigail stiffened. "News travels fast in small towns. Station master mentioned you bought a ticket for tomorrow's eastbound stage." He took a step closer. "Is it because of what Marshall said at the dance?" The directness of his question made her flinch. "My reasons for leaving are my own, Mr. Norton. Heath," he corrected softly. "After all this time, I wish you'd call me Heath. It hardly seems proper now." "Proper." He nearly spat the word. "That's all this town cares about, isn't it? Appearances and propriety and who's saying what about whom." Abigail wrapped her arms around herself. "Why are you here, Mr. Norton?" He paced the small room, energy radiating from him like heat from a stove. "I've watched you for 2 years, Miss Northcott. Watched you build a life here, teaching those children, helping at church socials, mending this broken little town with your kindness." He stopped directly in front of her. "And now you're going to let Frederick Marshall and his loose tongue chase you away. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that whatever happened before you came to Deadwood doesn't matter to me. I understand that I've wanted to speak to you properly for months but couldn't find the words." His voice softened. "And I understand that if you leave tomorrow, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Abigail's breath caught. "Mr. Norton Heath, you can't possibly mean I do mean it. Every word." He reached for her hand, hesitating just before touching her. "Don't leave, Miss Northcott, not because of them, not without giving us a chance." Abigail pulled back, turning away so he wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what I've done." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Tell me what's so terrible that you believe you need to run from it." The weight of her past pressed down on her shoulders, and for a moment, She considered telling him everything about her father's gambling debts, about the wealthy man in Boston who'd offered to clear them in exchange for her hand, about her flight west when she discovered the kind of man he truly was. But she couldn't bear to see the respect in Heath's eyes turn to disgust. "I can't," she whispered. "Then don't." He moved around to face her. "But don't leave either, at least not yet. Give me one day, just one, to show you that whatever happened before, whatever lies there spreading now, it doesn't change how I see you." "And how do you see me, Mr. Norton?" His eyes softened. "As the woman I want to build a life with." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful. Abigail felt dizzy with the weight of them. "One day," he repeated. "That's all I ask." She should refuse. The stage would leave at 9 the next morning, and with it, all the shame and whispers would be left behind. But something in Heath's steady gaze made her hesitate. "One day," she agreed finally, "but I make no promises beyond that." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the Black Hills. "I'll come for you at 8 tomorrow. We'll let that stage leave without you." After he left, Abigail stood motionless in the parlor, wondering what madness had possessed her to agree. One day couldn't possibly change anything. By the day after tomorrow, she would still be on a stage heading east, away from Deadwood and its judgments. Away from Heath Norton and his impossible hopes. But for the first time since Frederick's public humiliation, she felt something other than shame coursing through her veins. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through her curtains. Abigail had barely slept, torn between anticipation and the certainty that she was making a terrible mistake. She dressed with care in her second-best dress, a practical green cotton that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes and pinned her honey-brown hair in a simple but neat arrangement. At precisely 8 o'clock, she heard hoofbeats approaching Mrs. Willoughby's boarding house. Looking out the window, her breath caught at the sight of Heath Norton astride his chestnut gelding, leading a gentle-looking dapple-gray mare. "He's here," Mrs. Willoughby announced, appearing at Abigail's door with an expression that mixed disapproval and curiosity in equal measure. "Brought horses. Hardly proper for a single lady to go riding alone with a gentleman." "We'll stay within sight of town," Abigail assured her, though she had no idea what Heath had planned. When she stepped outside, Heath's face brightened in a way that made her heart trip. He dismounted smoothly, approaching with his hat in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Northcott. I thought we might ride out to Prospector's Ridge. The view of the valley is something special this time of year." The station master was sweeping the platform when they rode past the stage depot. He raised his eyebrows at the sight of Abigail clearly not preparing to board the 9 o'clock stage, and she felt her cheeks warm. By noon, the entire town would be buzzing with fresh gossip about her and Heath Norton. They rode in comfortable silence until the town fell away behind them. The late spring air was crisp with promise, wildflowers dotting the meadows in splashes of yellow and purple. "My father claimed this land 5 years ago," Heath said as they climbed the gentle slope that led to Prospector's Ridge. "Everyone said he was a fool. Too far from town, too close to Indian territory, but he saw something here that others missed." "And what was that?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious. Heath smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Possibility. That's what he always said." "This land is nothing but possibility, son." He glanced at her. "He died last winter. Pneumonia took him quick. I remember, the children made you sympathy cards." Abigail had suggested it, knowing how respected Heath's father had been in the community. "I kept every one of them," he said softly. "It meant a great deal, especially the note you included." They reached the top of the ridge, and Abigail gasped at the vista that spread before them. The valley stretched out in a patchwork of green and gold, with the distant mountains rising majestically against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Heath helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "This is my favorite place in the whole territory. I come here when decisions need making or when troubles seem too heavy." They sat on a flat boulder overlooking the valley, and Heath unpacked a simple picnic from his saddlebag: fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jar of honey. "Did you make the bread?" Abigail asked, surprised at how comfortable she felt with him, away from the prying eyes of Deadwood. Heath laughed. "Lord, no. Mrs. Finch at the Mercantile took pity on me. My cooking skills begin and end with coffee and beans." As they ate, Heath told her stories of growing up in the territory, of his father's dreams for their ranch, of the herd of cattle he was slowly building. Abigail found herself laughing at his tales of misadventures as a young cowhand, charmed by the passion with which he spoke of his land. "You never talk about before," he said eventually, his tone careful. "Before Deadwood, I mean." Abigail's smile faded. "There's not much to tell that's worth hearing. I'd like to hear it anyway if you're willing." His eyes held no judgment, only genuine interest. Perhaps it was the distance from town or the peaceful beauty surrounding them, but Abigail found herself speaking of things she'd kept locked inside for years. "My father was a good man, but weak. After my mother died, he sought comfort in gambling halls. By the time I was 20, we were drowning in debt." She stared out at the horizon. "A business associate of his, Mr. Hargrove, offered to clear all his debts in exchange for my hand in marriage. My father accepted without consulting me." Heath's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "Hargrove was respected in Boston society, wealthy, influential, nearly 40 years my senior. I agreed to the engagement to save my father from debtor's prison." The familiar shame washed over her. "3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he had other young women, girls he kept in an apartment across town, girls he—" Hurt, Heath's hand moved to cover hers, warm and reassuring. "I broke the engagement and fled west with what little money I could gather. My father—" Her voice broke. "He took his own life rather than face the consequences. Hargrove spread rumors that I had been compromised, that I had tried to entrap him. No one in Boston would hire me as a governess or companion after that." "And that's what Marshall was referring to at the dance," Heath said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Abigail nodded. "Hargrove must have written to someone here. The rumors found me as I always feared they would." Abigail. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent a shiver through her. "You did nothing wrong, nothing to be ashamed of." "In the eyes of society, hang society," he interrupted fiercely. "Any man or woman who would judge you for escaping such a situation isn't worth your consideration." His conviction was so strong, so genuine, that Abigail felt something tight within her chest begin to loosen. They sat in silence for a long moment, his hand still covering hers. "My turn for truth-telling, I suppose," Heath said finally. "I've wanted to court you properly since the first time I saw you teaching those children under the big elm when the schoolhouse roof was leaking. You had them all spelling words with sticks in the dirt, and you didn't even mind when little Tommy Peterson accidentally splashed mud all over your skirt." Abigail's eyes widened. "That was over a year ago." Heath nodded, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not a man who acts hastily, Miss Northcott. Some might call it caution. My father called it mulish stubbornness. I wanted to be certain of my feelings, of my ability to provide, of your reception of any advances I might make." "And now," she asked softly, "now I know that if I let you get on that stage tomorrow without speaking my heart, I'll regret it for the rest of my days." He turned to face her fully. "I'm asking for a chance, Abigail. A chance to court you properly, to show you that not everyone in Deadwood is small-minded and cruel." The sincerity in his eyes stole her breath. "The rumors won't stop just because you've shown me kindness, Heath." "Let them talk," he said with surprising vehemence. "I've never much cared for gossip, and anyone who would speak ill of you will find they've made an enemy of me." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reluctantly mounted their horses and began the journey back to town. Abigail's mind whirled with conflicting emotions, the lingering shame of Frederick's public rejection. the comfort of having finally shared her past with someone who didn't recoil in judgment, and the bewildering possibility that Heath Norton might genuinely care for her despite everything. The town came into view just as the setting sun painted the buildings in gold and amber. Abigail felt a flutter of anxiety as they rode down the main street, acutely aware of curious glances from townsfolk completing their evening errands. "Hold your head high," Heath murmured, riding close beside her. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." Mrs. Willoughby was waiting on the porch when they arrived at the boarding house, her expression a mixture of relief and disapproval. "Was beginning to think you'd run off together," she said tartly. "Supper's nearly cold." "My apologies for keeping Miss Northcott out so long," Heath said smoothly, helping Abigail dismount. "The day got away from us." HMP. "There's talk all over town about you missing the stage, Abigail," Mrs. Willoughby said, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "People are wondering if you've changed your mind about leaving." Abigail glanced at Heath, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the question in his eyes. "I'm still considering my options," she said finally. "Well, consider them over supper before it's completely ruined," the older woman huffed, turning to go inside. Left alone in the gathering dusk, Abigail felt suddenly shy. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It was unexpected. Will you still be here tomorrow?" Heath asked, the question gentle but direct. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Part of me still believes leaving would be simpler." "Simpler, perhaps, but right." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I'm not asking for promises, Abigail, just time to show you that there's a place for you here, rumors be damned." Before she could respond, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the touch sending warmth spiraling through her. "Sleep well," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, know that today meant everything to me." Abigail barely tasted Mrs. Willoughby's stew, her thoughts consumed by the decision before her. The eastbound stage would depart at 9 the following morning. A clean escape from the whispers and judgment. A return to anonymity, if not acceptance. But leaving meant abandoning the life she'd built here, her students who looked forward to her lessons, the small circle of friends she'd made, the sense of purpose she'd found in this rough-edged town. And now, it would mean leaving Heath Norton and the possibility he represented. She slept fitfully, dreams filled with stagecoaches and distant horizons and Heath's steady gaze. When dawn broke, she still hadn't made her decision. Abigail dressed mechanically, packing the last of her belongings into her trunk. If she chose to stay, she could always unpack again. If she chose to leave, she would be ready. At 8:30, Mrs. Willoughby knocked at her door. "Station master sent a boy to say the stage is running on time today. If you're going, you should head over soon." She hesitated, then added, "That Norton boy is outside. Been there since sunrise, just sitting on his horse watching the house." Abigail's heart lurched. "Thank you, Mrs. Willoughby." The older woman sighed heavily. "Girl, I've lived long enough to know that running from trouble rarely solves it. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stand your ground." With that surprisingly gentle advice, she shuffled back down the hallway. Abigail moved to the window and peered through the curtains. Sure enough, Heath sat astride his gelding across the street, his expression patient but determined. When he saw her at the window, he straightened and nodded once, respect in every line of his body. He wasn't going to pressure her. He was simply there, making his presence his preference known. The clock on her bedside table showed 9:15. If she was going to leave, she needed to decide now. With sudden clarity, Abigail realized she'd been asking herself the wrong question. Not should I stay or should I go? But what am I running toward and what am I running from? Was the promise of anonymity in some eastern town worth abandoning the life she'd worked so hard to build? Was escaping the judgment of people like Frederick Marshall worth giving up the chance to discover what might grow between her and Heath Norton? At 9:05, Abigail walked out of the boarding house, her reticule clutched tightly in her hands but her trunk still upstairs in her room. Heath straightened in his saddle, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "You're staying," he said, a statement more than a question. "I'm staying," she confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "At least for now. I won't promise forever, Heath, but I won't let fear chase me away either." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine after a storm. He dismounted in one fluid motion and crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "That's all I ask, a chance to show you that there's more good than bad in this town, and in me." In the distance, they heard the rumble of the stagecoach departing, but Abigail didn't turn to watch it go. Instead, she looked into Heath's hopeful eyes and felt, for the first time in years, that she might be exactly where she belonged. Over the next few weeks, Heath courted Abigail with a quiet determination that both charmed and bewildered her. He escorted her to and from the schoolhouse each day, tipped his hat to every lady they passed, and met any whispers with a steely gaze that soon had even the most dedicated gossips finding other topics for discussion. On Sundays, he sat beside her in church, his tall frame a protective presence that spoke volumes without a single word. When Frederick Marshall had the audacity to approach her after services one week, Heath stepped smoothly between them. "Miss Northcott isn't interested in further conversation, Marshall," he said, his tone polite but with an unmistakable edge. "Some women don't know what's good for them," Frederick sneered. "Or perhaps you don't know what you're getting, Norton." Before Heath could respond, Abigail laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Mr. Marshall," she said clearly enough for nearby churchgoers to hear, "I believe your rejection made your feelings perfectly clear. I suggest you direct your attentions elsewhere, as mine are quite happily engaged." The blush that rose to her cheeks at her own boldness was matched by the surprised pleasure in Heath's eyes as he offered his arm to lead her away. "Quite happily engaged, hum?" he murmured once they were out of earshot. "Figure of speech," she replied primly, but couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. As spring gave way to summer, Abigail found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't for years. Her students thrived under her renewed enthusiasm, and even Mrs. Willoughby commented on the change in her. "Never seen you with such color in your cheeks," the landlady observed one evening as Abigail prepared for a social at the church. "That Norton boy is good for you." "He's a good man," Abigail agreed, smoothing her best blue dress, the one she'd nearly packed away forever. "Men like that don't come along often," Mrs. Willoughby said with uncharacteristic gentleness. "My Albert, God rest him, was such a one, steady as bedrock and twice as dependable." She patted Abigail's hand. "Don't let fear rob you of joy, girl. That's the mistake too many make." The church social was alive with music and laughter when Abigail arrived on Heath's arm. Mrs. Peterson, whose twins were in Abigail's class, greeted them warmly, and even the mayor's wife, who had been pointedly cool since the incident with Frederick, managed a nod of acknowledgement. "See," Heath said quietly as they helped themselves to punch, "the tide is turning." "Because of you," Abigail replied. He shook his head. "Because they're finally seeing you as I've always seen you, strong, principled, beautiful inside and out." His words warmed her more than the summer evening, and when he asked her to dance, Abigail went willingly into his arms, no longer concerned with the watching eyes around them. As they turned about the floor, Heath's hand steady at her waist, he leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Would you ride out to Prospector's Ridge with me tomorrow? There's something I'd like to show you." The next day dawned clear and bright, the heat of summer already building as Heath helped Abigail onto the gentle gray mare that had become a familiar mount. They rode at an easy pace, the now familiar trail to Prospector's Ridge a pleasant journey through meadows bursting with wildflowers. When they reached the summit, Heath spread a blanket beneath the shade of a solitary pine and produced a picnic even more elaborate than their first fried chicken, fresh bread, blackberry preserves, and a small cake that Mrs. Finch must have baked specially. "What's the occasion?" Abigail asked, touched by the evident planning that had gone into the outing. Heath seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his hat before setting it aside. "I promised to show you something, remember?" At her nod, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, handling it with reverent care. "My father left the ranch to me, as you know. 400 acres, most of it good grazing land, but there was a piece where we're sitting now that he kept separate in his will." He handed her the document, and Abigail unfolded it carefully, scanning the legal language with growing confusion. "This is a deed in my name," Heath nodded, color rising in his cheeks. 30 acres from the ridge down to the creek. "My father always said this was the prettiest part of the whole property. Said whoever I married should have something that was hers alone, not just absorbed into Norton land." Abigail's fingers trembled against the paper. "Heath, I can't possibly accept. It's not a gift," he interrupted quickly. "At least, not exactly." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket again and withdrew a simple gold band. "It's an offer, a promise, a hope for our future if you want it." The world seemed to still around them as he knelt before her, the ring held between his roughened fingers. "Abigail Northcott, I've loved you since I saw you laughing with those children in the summer rain. I've loved your strength, your kindness, your determination to make a life on your own terms. I want to build something with you, a home, a family, a life. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as the full meaning of his gesture washed over her. This man, this good, honorable man, wasn't just offering marriage. He was offering her independence within partnership, respect alongside love, security without captivity. Everything that had been missing from her previous engagement. "The land will be yours regardless of your answer," Heath continued softly. "I won't have you feel that one depends on the other." "Heath Norton," she managed through her tears, "do you honestly believe I could refuse you now?" After everything, hope lit his eyes. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Abigail leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in their first kiss, soft, sweet, and full of promise. When she pulled back, the wonder on his face was worth every moment of pain that had led her to this place, to him. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the Deadwood church as summer faded into autumn, the maple trees outside ablaze with color. Mrs. Willoughby wept openly in the front pew, and Abigail's students scattered wildflower petals along the aisle. Even Frederick Marshall sent a polite note of congratulation, though neither bride nor groom paid it much mind. Their home rose on Prospector's Ridge, that winter a sturdy cabin with wide windows that looked out over the valley in one direction, and the Norton Ranch in the other. Heath insisted on adding a small schoolroom off the main house. "For when the snow's too deep to get to town," he explained, though they both knew it was for the children they hoped would come. By spring, the first foundations of their life together were firmly established. Abigail continued teaching in town 3 days a week, and spent the other days helping Heath with the ranch accounts and starting a small kitchen garden beside their home. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" Heath asked one such evening, nearly a year after she'd almost boarded that eastbound stage. "Staying, I mean." Abigail looked up at him, at the face that had become as dear to her as her own heartbeat. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "You rode after me when I was ready to run, and in doing so you showed me what courage really means." "Which is?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Standing your ground, facing the future together instead of fleeing from the past alone." She took his hand and placed it gently over her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their child had begun to make themselves known. "And I've never been less alone in my life." The wonder that bloomed on Heath's face as he understood her meaning was a sight Abigail knew she would treasure forever. As he gathered her into his arms, murmuring words of love and joy against her hair, she silently thanked whatever twist of fate had made her miss that stagecoach and choose instead this life, this love, this man who had never let her go. When their daughter was born the following winter, Strong lunged and determined. With her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's honey-brown hair, they named her Hope, for the emotion that had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge since. And as their family grew over the years that followed, the story of how Heath Norton had refused to let Abigail Northcott flee became something of a legend in Deadwood, a tale of persistence, courage, and a love strong enough to overcome the judgment of others. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the community that had long since embraced them both, Heath still looked at Abigail with the same devotion that had driven him to her door that fateful night. And Abigail, her hand still perfectly fitted to his after all these years, thanked God daily for the cowboy who had believed in her worth when she had forgotten it herself, the man who had ridden after her and never, ever let go.